When we talk about strategy, pocket aces are one of the more popular methods of doing it. My next guest, Derek VanRiper from The Athletic and Rates and Barrels, did it in mixed LABR. We'll talk about that next on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. It is draft season. We are talking lots of strategies. We talked auctions on Tuesday. We're going to talk snake draft strategy with pocket aces. Something you can do in auctions too, by the way. We'll do that. We got news and notes with our friend Derek VanRiper from The Athletic, the award-winning Rates and Barrels podcast that he and Eno Saris does. Does. This is why I didn't win. I can't even get do versus does right, but welcome to the reward losing podcast, RotoWire podcast here. But Derek, welcome to the show.
Hey, we're all looking up at Pitcher List right now. Nick Pollock does great work over there with Alex Fast and that whole team. So congrats to them for bringing home the hardware this year. But thanks for having me on, Jeff.
You bet. Let's jump right into it. Lots of news happening here. Let's start on top here with some good news. Brayan Bello just got paid by the Red Sox.
Yes, love to see players get paid, especially if it's on their terms. You want to sign an extension in a situation like Bello's, by all means, go ahead and do it. I think he's an interesting pitcher because I've seen a lot of profiles over the years, and I can't remember a lot of guys that were striking out 30% of the batters they faced, basically at every level of the minor leagues, who saw a drop close to like 20% for their first couple seasons in the big leagues. I realize there's a big gap right now between AAA and the majors, probably as wide as it's ever been. This is something that I hear from a lot of people that have scouted for a long time, but it seems like the stuff hasn't fully translated just yet. And I think if Bello is going to take the next step and actually become better in fantasy circles, at least become like a top 100 overall sort of pick someday, I think it's going to be solving lefties. That is the big thing for him. Finding a pitch that gets left-handers out more consistently, because that's where he has the biggest leak right now. Aside from not missing enough bats, I think that's where you're going to find hitters that consistently do damage against him.
Yeah, that's right. And I have him in XFL. I think, or did I trade him? I don't know. I had him at one point and I kept him. So I have too many leagues. That's the other thing. But I like Bello. I like the top three pitchers in the Red Sox rotation right now. I like Bello. I like Nick Pivetta, and I like Cutter Crawford. I think they all have some things to be that you can argue for. Not so sure about Whitlock or Houck or whoever else fills in with Giolito is out, but I think that they've got like the makings of an interesting roster. I know it's not been a positive news offseason, but I kind of like these starters.
They at least give you reasons to be excited. Some teams just don't have a group of five that you can get excited about at all. I think with Cutter Crawford, it's a lot of pitches. His stuff pops in Eno's Stuff Plus model, so there's been some buzz around him for a little while. With Houck, I think it's just like another problem against lefties. Houck is fantastic against righties. He's one of those guys that if it doesn't work for him as a regular starter, I would hope they continue using him as a bulk guy and just trying to pick their spots with him where he can at least go 3 or 4 innings at a time, because moving him completely into short relief just seems like they're leaving a lot of quality innings on the table. So I think anytime you've got talent like this, you're just looking at how these organizations are going to tweak these guys, what they're going to give them, what they're going to add to their own arsenals, and how they're going to try and solve their biggest flaws. But it's a common problem for this Boston rotation. Like, how are they going to handle lefties for the most part?
Yeah, well, and the good news is, I mean, they're in a ballpark that doesn't really benefit lefty power, especially. So that helps a little bit. Everybody thinks, oh, Fenway, it's terrible. Well, it's not bad, for left-handed pitchers. Right-handed pitchers against left-handed batters. It's where it's tough is all those people using the wall, playing wall ball. If you got a left-handed tosser that doesn't miss bats, bad news is going to happen there.
Yeah, not a good spot for an innings-eating lefty to be. That's for sure.
Do you find yourself rostering Cutter Crawford or rostering Nick Pivetta very frequently?
So not really. Pivetta, I think it's just because when you look at where he goes, usually it's probably somewhere in that pick 175 range, give or take a round or two in either direction. I think there's always someone in the room who likes him more. That's always been the case for Nick Pivetta. There were some changes to that pitch mix in the second half last season. I think that gives you reason to believe things could be different this time around, but it sure feels like we've been down this road before where Pivetta gets a little bit buzzy, runs hot for half a season, everyone gets excited and the ratios get blown up the following year. Maybe this is different this time, but plenty of other guys in that range that I like. And I think some of it's just like breaking ties, right? Are the Red Sox to you, are they kind of a 500 team? Like, do you feel like the lineup will score enough runs, the bullpen will protect leads? Like, are these starting pitchers going to be surprisingly good but not win a lot of games because of the circumstances around them? Because that's a little bit of a fear that I have,
Yeah.
mostly because of the bullpen. Run support shouldn't be a problem.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, we already have uncertainty of the closer with Kenley Jansen, both in terms of his health and maybe he gets traded. He's displayed his unhappiness with the offseason himself. So yeah, I don't have any Kenley so far. I know our friend Ryan Bloomfield took him in mixed labor when the draft we were together there. I kind of taken him out of my pool. I mean, it'd have to be where he drops to around pick 200, which just doesn't happen. I mean, he has to be in the Alvarado range for me to be able to take Kenley Jansen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I like about Kenley Jansen at this point, though, is if they were to flip him, I don't think a team would trade for him and make him a setup guy. I think he'd end up on another team that needs that capital C closer. So maybe it's a place like Philly. They've done it before, adding Craig Kimbrell late. Maybe it's a familiar place like the Dodgers. If you were to go there, maybe they'd close him in front of Evan Phillips. But I worry that we're at this point in his career where there's nowhere to go but down. The stuff's only going to get worse. And he's done a great job staying productive this late into his career. If you told me Kenley Jansen was still going to be turning out sub-4 ERAs and being this good into his late 30s, I would never would have believed that. I thought he would have burned out years ago.
He's straight out of the Chris List proven closer package there, where Chris would always take Trevor Hoffman one more year for this proven closer. So Kenley Jansen, Craig Kimbrell, I expect him to be on all of Chris's rosters this year. Yeah, I don't know. I maybe I'm wrong about Jansen, but I get the notion is you've survived the battle of time. How many like elite relievers have flamed out quickly over the years? How many flash in the pan closers have we seen that are top 1 year? And it's always he used Rivera and Hoffman as his canonical examples, but the guys that know how to close, quote unquote, know how to close. I mean they have survivor bias in their favor, and that also kind of works because sometimes they get discounted, like I'm doing right now to Jansen. So there you go.
There is a bit of a tier break though after him. It kind of feels like if you don't take Kenley Jansen, if you have no closers at that point, then there's a heavy sense of desperation. But if you're in a spot where you really want to have two that you trust, he's kind of the last one before you end up in a lot of open seas for job battles.
Yep. That's true. Let's move on. Carlos Rodon. I don't have any Carlos Rodon. I wanted to be able to buy into a bounce back year. Saw yesterday, his velocity was down. He got hit pretty hard, gave up a couple of homers. I'm just not in on him.
That's where I've been too. I know when he was out there last year, which wasn't very often, the underlying stuff numbers were okay in terms of velocity, right? It was just that he missed a lot of time. The secondaries didn't seem to be as crisp, and you could sort of chalk it up to a lost season full of injuries. And the problem I have with Rodon is that we look back at his career, he's been dealing with arm stuff forever.
Yes.
He's a guy that was overworked all the way back in his NC State days.
Oh.
And I mean, for his sake, I'm glad he came through it, bounced back, and got paid. But much like we were talking about, just looking at the same kind of range where he's drafted, like Pivetta going around pick 175, Rodon goes around pick 135. If you're telling me I can have Hunter Green or Carlos Rodon, give me the younger guy. Like, I think there's a much better chance Hunter Green can stay healthy for a full season. Both of them are going to deal with very hitter-friendly home parks. And the fact that Green's added 2 new pitches and still has excellent velocity gives me a lot more confidence in him. So I see Hunter Green as a better option. I think if you're willing to play the innings risk game, Michael King's situation being in Petco for half of the starts might be better than Carlos Rodon's right now. So there's a few different ways you can go with the types of pitchers you target in this range. But for me, it's just the longer term injury risk. It still doesn't quite make sense for me to gamble on Carlos Rodon in that regard, because I think this is more of a cumulative wear and tear from several serious arm injuries rather than just like a one-off Tommy John that's a year or two in the rearview mirror.
Oh, for sure. Totally agree with you on that. Yankees, they project to be a better hitting lineup this year, but they did lose King. Obviously, they could go out and sign Blake Snell today. They could sign him tomorrow. They could sign Jordan Montgomery. That's still within their, possibilities. I mean, let's face it. Once you break through the luxury tax, I mean, you're already there. Although it is pretty punitive, to pay that 110% tax every single dollar you spend. But nonetheless, I view them as a team that could still go out and add more.
Yeah, they may need it. Stroman probably helps stratify some innings for them a little bit, stabilizing that group somewhat. Nestor Cortez seems to be healthy this spring. Dealt with a lot of shoulder stuff last year, but ultimately they don't have quite the same depth. The guy that I kind of like as a late flyer, more for mono leagues and for draft and hold right now, is Will Warren. I think he could end up seeing a decent amount of time in that rotation because he's moved up a chair in importance for them. And even if you like this group of starters, you can't deny the injury history that they've kind of put together outside of Garrett Cole, who's mostly been healthy throughout his career.
Will Warren's a name that not too many are familiar with. I'll cop to needing to know a little bit more about him myself. Tell me more.
So Will Warren is kind of a stuff model play in part, but also he's the 8th round pick in 2021, just one of those guys that the Yankees developed and made pretty effective. Big K numbers last year at AAA, started the year at AA, was only there for like 30 innings. Sub 4 ERA in the International League. The big question is going to be control. If he can limit the walks, there is probably a future like number 3 starter there that can actually miss some bats. I think this just comes down to trusting him as a guy that has a good combo, like at least a fastball slider, some other secondaries he can go to. Just a really nice name to file away. At least, even if you don't play those formats, you don't play mono leagues, you don't play draft and hold, probably a watch list sort of guy for when he does get called up, because if he takes the job at some point, he could actually hold a spot.
Yeah. I like it. And the Yankees sneakily have been a pitching development machine. More in the bullpen in the starting rotation, but they've struggled to develop hitters, but they've really done a pretty good job. I think Aaron Boone actually does a really good job managing his bullpen.
Yeah, he does. And I think the loss of everybody that gave up in that trade to get Juan Soto is kind of a big deal, right? I mean, like Johnny Brito, Randy Vasquez, Drew Thorpe, like those guys all would have been ahead of someone like Will Warren in the pecking order for innings this year. And they're all gone in one fell swoop. So that depth chart looks a lot different. I think it's really worth monitoring some of their younger starters throughout spring training and how they start the year at AA and AAA, just to get a sense for who might be the next options up, because we know they've had to turn to that depth in the past, and this year's probably going to be the same.
I find myself adding Brito at the end of deeper drafts, 15-team mixed league drafts. I think I did so in LABR, or maybe it was Scarf. I forget which one I did. Too many leagues again. But Brito, I find, has a smidgen of upside, strikeout upside, and I, of course, got to like that ballpark.
Yeah, love the park. I think the big flaw for Brito has been, again, lefties mostly. Yankee Stadium blows that up. You give up homers to lefties, that's going to be a big problem there. Petco does the exact opposite. So I think it's a streaming play for me. Deeper League's a guy that I'm going to throw a lot inside of Petco and probably steer away from on the road, at least until we see what the pitch mix looks like and see if there's anything that's different about him now compared to when he debuted. But big difference between his home and road ERA last year with the Yankees, like 3.17 on the road, 5.94 at home for Brito.
Yikes. That's crazy. So yeah. And of course, I think a lot of people are in on Michael King. I'm one of them. I made sure make a point of I got him at XFL back in November. And I've already had 2 people come out of the woodworks trying to trade for him from me here as a rebuilding team in that league. Oh, well, I can give you a draft pick. Well, maybe I just like Michael King, but we'll see.
How do you handle projecting innings for someone like Michael King, who used to be a starter, has been hurt, and then has gone through several years of being a reliever and then switches roles again for a partial season? Do you use the previous career high as a North Star? That was like 149 innings back in 2017 in the minors, but that's kind of close to a full workload, right? If you throw 34 innings on top of that, there's no limitation. It's just like, how much do the steps between 5 or 6 years ago and now matter when we're trying to determine like how effective and how healthy someone can be with that added workload?
So I put him at 120 this year. ATC's got him at 140. So yeah, it's on the low end, which is why, like, in one league where I did wait on starting pitching, I went with Merrill Kelly over King because I needed innings. I knew I was going to need innings, and I thought, well, maybe I'll get King on the way back. I didn't. That happens, so be it. We move on. But it was one of those where I was just like, I love him. But it is tough. You run into the same problem with AJ Puck, with Jordan Hicks. In the case of both Puck and Hicks, they've had durability issues of their own. I'm very pessimistic about the Hicks experiment not working, especially for the money they spent on him.
I think the way they must have looked at it is that if it doesn't work as a starter, there's a couple other things they can do. They can treat Hicks the way they've treated some of their other depth starters in the past, not using them for 5+ innings at a time, but throwing an opener in front of them, having them go through the lineup once, maybe twice in some instances, and that would be okay too. Like that would work for $11 million a year. Or he's a late inning shutdown reliever. Like they've got Camilo Doval as their established closer, but if Jordan Hicks goes back into the bullpen and he's one of the top 20, top 25 relievers in baseball for several years of that contract, that's probably worth $11 million a year too. I think it's interesting that he actually probably has more pitches than a lot of people would assume. I think most people watch Jordan Hicks, they're like, oh, it's all velo. That's all it is. Right. A lot more than that. And if you go back to his time as a starter in the Cardinals organization, there was a pretty deep arsenal before he started shifting into the relief work. So there's like 1,000 ways this situation could play out. Both of my first 2 drafting holds, I went ahead and swooped in and got Hicks. I don't want him everywhere, but the park helps too, because even if he's a 4 or 5 inning guy in deeper leagues, I think those innings at home especially are going to be pretty useful.
And let's face it, 4 or 5 innings is becoming more and more normal anyhow. That's less damaging for teams. It hurts us when the guy goes 4 and is a starter. You're like, okay, give him an opener, please. Can we get the Ryan Yarbrough 16 wins with an opener in front of him thing? But I mean, it's less damaging overall. I think I saw that in the context of a debate on Tyler Glasnow earlier. Like, if you're taking him early, how many innings do you have him for? And well, if he throws 140, that doesn't really hurt you now.
Right. 140 is probably okay. And why can't he throw 170, 175? Like, I think it's within the range of outcomes. He threw 120 last year. Like, the Dodgers are going to be a little bit careful with everybody anyway. They've done this for years. They kind of quietly use 6-man rotations. They don't talk loudly about it, but that's generally what they'll do for stretches because they have October on their minds, and rightfully so. If that keeps him healthy, if the quality of those innings on a start-by-start basis are as good as anybody in the league, like, I don't know, if Spencer Strider can become SP1 with some innings limitations, why couldn't Tyler Glasnow do it, right? These are similarly great skills.
Yeah, and, great skills, and now great team behind him, although it's not like Tampa wasn't a good team behind him. He's actually, it's so funny. Like that whole trade's fascinating because I'm on Ryan Pepio to a certain extent. Although he was awful this week. I know a lot of people, other people are as well. It's like, okay, well, he gets to go to the Rays. Well, he was with the Dodgers. It's like, when Cleveland and Tampa make a trade that involves a pitcher, I'm like, okay, Aaron Savali actually improved leaving Cleveland. How does that happen? I mean, Cleveland's supposed to be awesome with pitching, and they are. But if you look at like Savali's, before and after splits, especially like K percentage minus walk percentage, I saw that on Twitter the other day. I think it might have been Bloomfield again that was pointing it out. He was so good with Tampa.
Yeah, I saw James had a YouTube short actually that found my timeline the other day, and it was really good. It was a bunch of pitchers that I actually like, and he pointed out Savali as one of them that people are targeting because they can do a lot of the same things with Savali that they did with Zach Eflin last year. We have a guy with that many pitches and command. There's an endless number of adjustments that you can make. The Rays take guys with less stuff, fewer pitches, and simplify things even more than they have to for a guy like Savali, and they'll find success. And there was a really good story that Chad Jennings wrote for The Athletic this week about the Rays and how they lean really heavily initially on giving guys fewer targets. They'll have one simplified target for a pitcher, get them to trust their stuff in the zone, and then eventually build up from there and make that pitcher more effective. And I mean, if you think about pitching mechanics and improving command, especially if you have one spot that you're throwing at with 3 or 4 different pitch types, you can make that work pretty well. So clearly they have a good organizational direction. We've seen that for a long time now. It is more fun when they trade with other smart teams or other teams that are good at developing pitching. Cleveland's certainly one of them. The Dodgers are certainly one of them. Because you wonder, like, what can the Rays do with Ryan Pepio that the Dodgers didn't do? But I liked Pepio when he was still a Dodger because we saw some skills growth last year. We saw the walk rate get a lot better. That was always the flaw that seemed like it might hold him back from being more than a back end sort of guy. He cut that. It was in a small sample, but the stuff's always been electric. And I think you have to give something to get something. I think that's
Yeah.
more or less what happened in this particular trade. I kind of wonder if there's something similar brewing in the trade the Brewers made, sending Corbin Burns to Baltimore and getting DL Hall back. Like, I don't think the Orioles looked at DL Hall and thought, this guy's never going to be a starter. I think they just saw a proven ace that they could have for at least 1 year in Burns, and a guy in DL Hall they feel like is somewhat expendable. I think if you can scout for stuff or develop stuff and then figure out the command later, there's a whole pool of pitchers out there that you can go after. You can go draft and sign and bring into your organization. And some teams can't unlock those guys.
I saw Nick Pollock snag DL Hall early in AL LABR auction there for $2. Like, he came up in the first 15 nominations, I think. So, and I wasn't in the room, so I don't know if he nominated him for 2 or if someone did 1 and he went 2 really quick or what happened there. But between DL Hall and Jacob Junis, there's 2 guys there that I think the Brewers kind of have under the radar that could be sneaky good.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're a fan of the team, your faith is being tested right now because it's being pushed even harder than usual. Like the guys you haven't seen before, guys that haven't necessarily stayed healthy before. Junis is so much like a one pitch guy on paper. The slider is just sort of everything, but I think there's still some more tweaks that they're working on. He's been working on. I remember reading something about him a long time ago. His brother, I think, is a pitching coach and kind of helped him develop that slider that got him back onto the big league radar. But I think it's the creativity with the usage. The Brewers are another one of those teams where you could look and say, for stretches, they might use 6 starters.
Right.
At various points, they may throw an opener in front of someone like Junis. They may say, there are numbers between 1 and 6. Let's see if we can just get 3 or 4 from Jake Junis because that makes our team better, right? So
right.
All of those situations are optimizing skills and giving us the best possible per inning numbers, which the deeper the league, the more that matters. Like, I love the idea of Jake Junis being on an NL only team or a draft and hold team. I don't know yet how much I'll want to have him on like a 12 team, like in the RotoWire Online Championship. Do I want Jake Junis as my last pitcher? Probably not. Probably more of like a streaming type or a watch list sort of guy for me in leagues that shallow. But in deeper leagues, I have a lot of confidence that he's going to be used correctly and ultimately provide enough value to occupy a roster spot.
Yeah, he was one of 25 pitchers with 80 or more innings last year that had a K percentage minus walk percentage over 20. So, and that was the one I was like, oh, did not notice that. Yeah, now I'm intrigued. PJ asked a couple about another Brewer, Mizorowski, and you could throw in Duggar into that mix. Any interest in those two?
Yeah, Mizorowski is another kind of like DL Hall, just in the sense that it's exceptional stuff with shaky command.
Yeah,
it's a pattern. They're one of the organizations that trust that profile. The big question is going to be if he can do kind of something similar to Spencer Strider and say, my fastball is so good, my slider's so good, I don't need a third pitch, or if he'll actually have to develop a third pitch he can throw consistently to handle lefties, which seems to be the theme of the episode, even though it wasn't really designed as such.
Right.
I like him. I think he's so young, and last year I think it was only 21 innings at AA, and they weren't great from a results perspective. I would expect to see Mizorowski more in the second half and maybe in more of a flexible role.
Yeah.
Like I think this is more of a keeper dynasty play than a 2024 play. Or if you're looking at like reserve spots in a really deep league, sure, one of your reserve picks. Like if you're doing it with the mindset of 50 or so innings late in the year, that's probably the more likely positive outcome for this year. But the long-term future seems very bright.
Yeah. We titled this podcast Pocket Aces, not pocket pitchers in the really deep spots and deep spots in deep leagues. They're late spots in deep leagues. So we'll get to that. But before we do that, quick note from our sponsor at Fantrax. Fantrax, the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring systems, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more, and it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's FANTRAX.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. I'm here with Derek VanRiper from The Athletic. You can check out his podcast, Rates and Barrels. Obviously, you can see him on Twitter at Derek VanRiper. Derek, let's talk about pocket aces. You did it in LABR. I've started it up in a very similar start in TGFBI, but you were kind of the inspiration for that. I like how your team played out as we were drafting. Fred and I were doing the podcast live streaming. I was like, man, that's another good one there. Fred was like, oh, he got me again. Fred was right in between the two of us there. And I liked how your team developed. So let's start by on top by just talking about what is pocket aces, like what are the pros and cons of it, all that sort of stuff. Let's define it.
Yeah, for me, I guess the way I would define it would be 2 starting pitchers, usually within your first 3 picks. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a first rounder like Strider or Cole, but in this instance, this would be kind of like one of the more extreme variations of it. And the idea is to be dominant in ratios and to get the extra edge and Ks that you get from those very top end pitchers. The group would include, in a typical year, probably 7 or 8 different starters that are capital A aces for fantasy purposes, where they tick every box as far as being plus across the board and in the Ks and the ratio categories. So this year, I think my board would be something in some order like Strider, Cole, Burns, Glasnow, Wheeler, Luis Castillo, George Kirby, and maybe Yamamoto. I think that's a little borderline right now.
Yeah.
Like I really want to put him in that group, and it doesn't take much to like rattle me enough this time of year to just say, he's just barely on the outside looking in. So for me, pocket aces would be a combination of 2 of those 7. Everybody's group's going to be a little bit different who's in it. Some people might have a healthy Kevin Gossman in that group of someone they would trust. Some people might be firmly on the Yamamoto deserves to be in there. Some people might like someone like Aaron Nola. But yeah, for me, it's just 2 out of your first 3 picks are starting pitchers, and you're trying to be dominant in those 3 pitching categories in particular.
Yeah, and I've heard some people say there's only 6, there's only 4, there's only 7. So it is interesting to see where that is defined. I think because of Gossman's shoulder, I'm taking him out of that part of the equation. And then, I think like Fred's got him at like 4. Like he after Wheeler, he stops. It's hard stop there for him. Other people like, will include Yamamoto or Castillo or Kirby, as you alluded to, or Pablo Lopez. Some people really love Pablo Lopez.
Yeah, I think Pablo Lopez brings me to this interesting idea that you could be a health risk C or D pitcher for a long time, and then you can sort of pitch your way out of it, right? I think pitcher injury history and pitcher risk is a little bit different. So whatever the grade was 2 or 3 years ago, it's obviously better now. Is it a health grade A for Pablo Lopez? Like I'm not putting him up there. Maybe some other people are, and that's why they like him as a possible ace. I think he's a good pitcher. I don't think he's elite. I think we've probably seen the absolute best from him at this point, and there's nowhere to go but slightly down from here. But I'm not trashing anyone who's taking him in that range. I mean, he's coming off of a phenomenal season. He's shown these skills for a long time, and now he's done it with volume in back-to-back seasons with 180 plus now in each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, he has. And so that, and so that's interesting. Now, when you drafted Strider at 1.5 in LABR, and if you're streaming with us right now, you can see the grid from the draft there. Derek drafted from the 5 spot, took Strider at 1.5, and then got Corbin Burns on the way back at 2.11. Were you planning all along about going pocket aces, or was it because Burns fell to you?
It was actually because some of the hitters I was hoping would be there weren't there.
Right.
And if Ellie De La Cruz was still there, he went 1 pick before me to Allen Harrison, I would have taken the gamble on Ellie in this particular spot. I think Michael Harris would have been a really tough call for me. I like Harris, but I think I would have kicked the can down the road for that first hitter and gone pitcher over Harris. And if something unusual had happened with like Devers or Lindor, maybe someone that doesn't always fall actually fell, like maybe that would have changed my mind. So this wasn't like I'm getting my pocket aces and that's the way it's going to be. It was a little more like, okay, if this happens, I'll go this way. If this happens, I'll go the other way. I probably would have taken Tyler Glasnow though at 3.5 if I had a hitter where I had Burns. So this still would have been some kind of pocket aces build in the end, assuming that Glasnow was available, it turned out he was, because I see Glasnow as a clear-cut top 5 starting pitcher. Like
Really?
I'm all in. I see all the debates on Twitter. I don't roll up my sleeves and get in there. Like, if you don't like Glasnow, you don't like his injury history, great, that's fine. It just means I'm more likely to get him. I'm not going to try and convert the non-Glasnow people to my side. I'm just going to let them be non-Glasnow people and play against them and see how it plays out.
Well, and the thing is, I don't see you in the streets of Twitter fighting it out
No.
that often. That's not your style.
No, not my style, and I don't have the luxury of as much downtime as I used to have to.
Right.
But even if I did, I think I'd spend that downtime doing something else.
Yeah. And I hear you on that one there too. I do love Twitter still, even though all the changes that have happened and all that. I still enjoy it. It's still my sports bar because I don't go to bars that often. So yeah, I enjoy it. Plus, West Coast sports bars stink because the games are always over. But besides that, it's great. Where are you more likely to take pocket aces? This is a good question for Paul in the chat here. Would you take pocket aces in an 18 points league? Like, is it better to go pocket aces in a short, shallow league or a deep league?
I think it's better to do it in a deep league because I think the quality of what you can get innings wise is really high in a shallow league. 8 and 10 team leagues, you can take on more injury risk. Thanks, Yance. I'm glad you're out there fighting for me, man. I don't have the energy for it. I don't have the temperament or the energy for it. It's not how I go. So the deeper the league, the more I want the pocket aces. I think part of what got me onto wanting Strider with that 5th overall pick was that I see a pretty big gap in most projections, most dollar value calculations between Strider and Garrett Cole and the other top 5 starting pitchers. Like, there's a
Right.
gap from Strider down to whoever that number 2 pitcher is. It's Cole for me. Might be someone else for everybody else. That's fine. And then you look at that compared to Acuna versus whoever you want to rank as the number 2 hitter. It's a similar gap. And even with the knee scare this spring, that's still a decent gap. I think Acuna is still the 1-1 on most people's boards. I wanted that edge. That was a big part of it. And I think that edge is more important in a 15-team league. The other part of this too, 15-team leagues, whether it's NFBC or not, are very tough in Fab. Like, you're going up against 14 other teams every week that all want the same thing. It's hard to win the bids for what you need. It's harder to stream pitchers in those leagues. Everyone's looking at the same stuff. Everyone's trying to get a week ahead on 2-start pitchers. Everyone knows which 5 offenses are garbage. Like, it's like that creates a bit of a problem in and of itself. So the added benefit of pocket aces that I have found, and I haven't used it a ton. I think the first time I did it was Noah Syndergaard back when he was good, and Madison Bumgarner back in his prime, right? And I stacked 2 closers on it too because I had a wheel spot in a NFBC main event back when you could still draft in Chicago. That's how old I am.
Yes.
But all of this for me is like you get on a different track when you're building your roster. You're looking at different players than other people around you at the draft table. And I like that a lot in a snake draft because I think my strength is auctions, clearly, by results and how my brain works. Like, I do better when I have more freedom to build the roster the way I want. And this sort of gives me a nudge more in that direction.
Right.
It also forces you to look at some hitters at cost that maybe you in a vacuum aren't as excited about. Like, at the beginning of draft season, if you said, are you going to have a lot of Royce Lewis if he's a 4th round pick? I'd have said, I don't know. Maybe, probably not. Are you going to be into Nico Horner as your primary source of speed in the 5th round? I don't know. Probably not in a vacuum. But you end up getting into different player pockets this way. And I kind of like that because you're shopping in a different place at a different time than a lot of the other teams that have more similar builds to each other.
So I'm doing TGFBI and a glacially slow draft. And I also went Lewis Horner 4-5 while doing pocket aces at the 1.5 spot. I did Strider Wheeler in mine. I'll throw that grid up there in a little bit, but we're looking at your team. But is very similar. I was like, and it wasn't like I said, "Oh, Derek did, I'm going to do it." But I looked and I was like, "Oh, here we are. Look at us." You know, it was like it was more one of those sort of situations there. But although I do admire how your team worked, I like how your team flowed during the draft, and yeah, it gives you the freedom to try some things later. I mean, you have to have you have to prioritize getting bats later on, and you did it, and that's one of the things. Okay, you started pocket aces. How do you follow it up?
I think for me, My belief is if you do the pocket aces approach, you want to make sure you do well with your relievers also, because you don't want to start leaking in the ratios by waiting too long to get saves. Like, one of the costs of waiting for saves isn't necessarily that you won't get saves. It's that you're probably taking on 3.5 ERAs and lower K rates, and those things work against the thing that you kind of built the foundation for. Like, part of the goal is to win those categories. So for me, following it up with elite relievers was important. And then kind of watching throughout the middle rounds, like, how much of a supply is there of each thing that I need as I'm catching up with my bats? Are there enough power hitting first basemen left? Are there enough middle infielders who can run a little bit? Are there enough third basemen left for me to have a quality starter that I believe in? I just didn't want to create a weakness by having to go back into pitching too early, or by choosing to go back into pitching too early, because I think there's enough pitching where you can wait 10, 12 rounds pretty easily after you get your first two and still come out on their side with a lot of guys that will be in your lineup consistently. My goal
Yeah.
was to try and have no more than 3 spots out of my 9 starting pitching spots where I'm even thinking about who I'm starting in a given week. That was kind of my loose goal, and I think it turned out okay. I think things generally fell into place about as well as I'd hoped. I think the one maybe regret that I have is taking the YOLO approach with Jackson Chourio. I think that was the 9th round.
Yep.
Part of the reason why I did it was because I felt like without a hitter in the first 2 rounds, I wanted to find someone that could maybe be an early round hitter in 2025. Not out of the question for someone like that. Wyatt Langford might have been a similar pick I could have thought about there, and it would have been the same kind of purpose. It's interesting that Langford went a lot later than Chourio, given what's happened in the week since this draft took place. But that might be the one spot where I took on unnecessary risk and probably didn't need to or shouldn't have, just based on there being plenty of other established quality bats available in that. And it probably forced me to wait a little bit longer to go back into the starting pitching pool. So really it depends on like how much you like the pitchers that go around pick 200 and later. If you love that group, you can wait until that group. If you don't, you have to get in a little bit sooner, and you have to figure out what you're going to take out of your build to get back in for that SP3 or that SP4 that you really want to get, maybe in that 125 to 175 range.
Absolutely. It makes a whole lot of sense there. For what it's worth, you did this like mid-February. Chourio still went in the 9th round of my TGFBI league a month later, or almost a month later. It just feels like it's a month later. And then Langford went in the 10th, a full round later in that. And this is a more recent draft, and all we've seen with Langford. The thing is, Chourio had already signed his contract. You know, there's that security in knowing we're going to be there.
Yeah, and I think it's like, even if he goes down to start the season, which I thought was possible when I drafted him, I think it's still possible today. If as long as he hits as you'd expect at AAA within 3 or 4 weeks, I would imagine he gets a chance to debut then. More likely, I still think he's an opening day piece for them. And the way that lineup's built, they don't have to put him in the heart of the order right away. They can ease him in a little bit, let him hit in the bottom third if they think that's what's best for him. A lot of ways it can play out. But I also think with the elite prospects, you know, those 2 guys in particular being outfielders, you can cover that spot pretty easily, even in a 15-team league. So then it's just making sure you don't take on too much playing time risk at the bottom of your starting outfield group. You know, you don't want to have risky 4th and 5th outfielders if Jackson Chourio is kind of one of your foundational bats.
Right. Well, and here's the thing too. It's a 15-team mixed league, so there's going to be weaknesses for everybody. There's going to be a spot where you're uncomfortable, and maybe you've tried to isolate that spot into an area where you know there's a better chance of finding a replacement. You know, and, just like any draft strategy, it's impossible to have everything covered.
Yeah, you're going to have a weakness somewhere. And I think that was the other part of like, how'd you land on Nico Horner if you don't really like him that much? Well, the thing I think you find most seasons is cheap power usually comes with a low batting average. So if you're making up grounded power later, it's going to come with a guy that hits 220 or 230. Not the end of the world to have a couple guys like that. But if you're chasing a lot of power, you have 4 or 5 guys like that. Now you're sinking yourself in another category. So it was important for me to say, okay, Jazz Chisholm's probably a better all-round player than Nico Horner and more exciting for sure, even though there's a lot of injury risk there. But I don't think Jazz Chisholm's going to be good in batting average. And even though he might go 30-30, I actually need someone that could hit 280 or 290 with a lot of runs and a lot of steals to be really stable for me in that spot. And I'll try and cobble it together in those other categories as I move along. And I saw one of the comments, I think it was PJ in the comments there, said, using pocket aces, it's hard to find enough speed. I would agree with that. I think you're probably going to be weak in steals or saves, maybe both if you go pocket aces.
Yep.
I made sure I wasn't weak in saves. I am comfortable being weaker in steals because steals don't correlate as well with the other hitting categories. So
Yeah.
that was why I was willing to take that on as a weakness. I mean, those are the two categories. Like if you're going to punt a category in season, the top three for me would be saves. It's probably not steals. It saves average depending on your build, and then steals would be third. But because of that
Okay.
weak correlation, I think you could just be okay in steals, and everything else in your lineup can be really good, and you can still have a great team.
Yeah, I think that's right. LABR is a trading league too.
Yep.
So there's another option to address what you missed there. It's not as fluid roster wise, like free agent wise. So you only have 100 units instead of 1,000 units to bid. There's no $0 bids. There's no trading of fab. So I mean, yes, you can trade, but it's more limited than you think.
Yeah, I think that's something that the NFBC has sort of broken my brain, where I try to
Yes.
solve every possible problem, or as many of the possible problems as I can on draft day, and trading changes everything. I mean,
Yes.
someone else is going to have a weakness. You might have a relative strength that's their weakness. You got to find that early on in the season. I find that the most effective time for me to fix a roster is usually that window from like the middle of May through Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day weekend, it's like everybody's internal clock goes off and they say, okay, I believe my team is actually bad at X, so I will go fix this problem now. I don't know why it takes people 2 months to really believe it. I think you can see it
Right.
coming out of a draft. I think you can see it after a couple of weeks sometimes.
You can see
But
it absolutely at the draft. I mean, let's face it. What do we do for a living, right?
yeah, you should know.
Yeah, we should know. Maybe not everybody does it for a living, but nonetheless, we provide information. We know better. Otherwise, or if we don't, and it's like, it's surprise, it's an injury. Okay, that's one thing, or a player job battle we lose, or a player doesn't perform, but coming out of a draft, how you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the key, if you're going to trade really early in the season, is just find out who's playing more than expected and producing more than expected, and then go find
Mhm.
that player on someone else's roster, because that's found money, right? So
Yeah.
just a random example is like Whit Merrifield in a deeper league, not a player you'd ordinarily like seek out or care about. Whoever has Whit Merrifield's probably getting extra steals at the beginning of the season because he's going to play while Brandon Marsh is hurt.
Yeah.
So that person might feel a lot better about trading you some steals if you need steals. It might not be Merrifield directly, but they may see a little bit of an excess. If you can pick out their flaw, you could probably work something out. So I think it's just like being super active and aware of what's going on with other people's teams. That's like
Right.
the way to fix your own roster would be a trade.
I'm just looking at my roster. I'm saying, hey, what can I DVR? What can I do to get you into a Whit Merrifield today? But there we go. As a matter of fact, that was kind of one of those agnostic. I guess I'll take Merrifield picks. So I'm not going to really go too crazy on that. But let's look at the next question. Okay, you've gone pocket aces. You've got your 2 stars, your studs, your foundation pieces. When do you next dip back into the starting pitcher pool?
So yeah, this comes back to working backwards. Like where do you think the market is generally like undervaluing some pitchers? Because that's when you have to start getting back in. And for me, it's somewhere around that pick 200 mark. It's where
Mm.
Yu Darvish tends to go. I think Yu Darvish is really undervalued. I think you'll see him inside a lot of people's top 40 starting pitcher rankings. Maybe that'll change over the course of these next few weeks because he's healthy this spring. He'll start to creep up the board a little bit, but I wanted to wait about that long. There's a bunch of other pitchers that go in this range. I mean, there's every kind of pitcher you could want. There's Aaron Savale, who we talked about a little earlier.
Yep.
There's Yusei Kikuchi, who stopped walking guys, and hey, they did it before in Toronto with Robbie Ray, and the arsenal's a little bit different and better than it used to be with Kikuchi, so that looks legit to me. It's guys like Taj Bradley who could get a lot better just in one season. It's a lot of different profiles. Nestor Cortez coming off the injury could be a little bit of an innings eater, but at least he's an innings eater on a good team. If you like shopping in that bin, that's about where you should get back in. I think what's interesting is if you try to go really aggressively back in, like after, I don't know, round 7, round 8 or so, like maybe if you didn't have 2 closers, you'd want to get another high volume source of good ratios. That would make a lot of sense. Because I had the 2 closers, that probably led me to that
Yeah.
waiting longer sort of approach.
Yeah. And that makes a whole lot of sense. And one thing that I did do pocket aces too, and I differed a little bit. In fact, I think I'll show it now here on I'll show that here for my TGFBI league, which is still ongoing, by the way. So let's instead I'll show you this one instead. It's where are we going? Here we go. I've got it here. I went Strider Wheeler to start, and instead of two closers, I only was able to get one, and this wasn't really a choice. I mean, it's always a choice, I guess, but closers went earlier in my TGFBI league than they did in your LABR league, in your draft there. For instance, you were able to get in the 7th and 8th rounds, you were able to go ahead and get Helsley and Fairbanks. Compare that to my draft where Fairbanks went in the 6th round. That's just as a point of reference there. It was tighter. I got Alexis Diaz in the 7th. Helsley went at 7.1. I wanted to get 4 hitters before I got my next pitcher, but there were just not any other really closers I wanted coming back to me in the 8th round. Clay Holmes was gone. Seawald was gone. Seawald's always like my guy I get. I feel like there. If I wanted to take another closer, I would have had to dip all the way down to Craig Kimbrell, who I'm not on board with. I've stated my objections on him before, and Adbert Alzolay. I mean, that's how bad the drop off was. So just got to remember, all politics are local. The closer pool is different every time.
Right. I think you do want to, if you're going to think about the pocket aces approach and you end up using it, you want to have your A, B, and C plans for your saves, because those runs are brutal. Sometimes just where you're positioned in the order, you miss out on even having a shot at some of the guys that you really like at a fair price. You don't want to solve that problem while you're on the clock or in between turns over the course of the draft and say, oh crap, what am I going to do? I have no closers I like. It's the 8th round. Where am I going to go? Like you want to have thought that one through, the emergency plan. Think that one through beforehand. It will save you. You'll come up with something that is a lot better than what's likely to happen off the cuff. But that's a really aggressive room with relievers. We see that happen in the NFBC. We see it happen in various rooms because people just get locked on the same sort of strategy. And I guess that kind of goes back to that zig where everyone else zags sort of benefit of the pocket aces too, is like, if you can avoid those runs at any point in the draft, regardless of what kind of strategy you're building, I think you're better off for it. I think you will find that you're not giving up potential value chasing something that you think is becoming scarce too quickly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's always important there to do that. So instead of getting the second closer, I got a third starter. I got my guy, Tanner Bybee, who I always get. And I actually paid sticker price for him this time as opposed to reaching up like I usually do. So I showed an ounce of discipline for once and got him at 125 instead of like 105 or 95 or what I'm willing to pay for him.
I mean, that's really good value. I think the strength is clearly the ratios. The K rate might be good instead of great, but this will work out fine. The AL Central is such a soft landing spot in general for pitchers, and there's plenty of reason to believe that Bybee could still get better. But if what we saw last year is just who he is for the foreseeable future, I think you're perfectly happy with that as your third starter, especially at that price.
Yeah, I think so too. I got a little lucky, as was pointed out in the comments here, that for, after going pocket aces, I was fortunate to get Luis Robert at 3.5. Only because four starters went immediately in front of me in the 3rd round, which I needed. Derek pitch bat. I keep feeling like bats and closers got pushed up in this league, and closers kept being a value. You don't want closers to be a value for everybody else when you're a pocket aces guy.
No, you don't want that. You definitely want the extra inflation on the closers. I think that works out better for you as far as how you played it versus how the room played it. And yeah, Luis Robert as your first hitter is great. I think he went 3 picks before my turn in the LABR draft, so I didn't have that opportunity. I think the tricky thing with that pick is if Robert's not there, and let's just say one of the 4 teams that went before you that took a starter, it looks like it was Castillo, Lopez, Kirby, Gossman. Robert's one of those picks instead, and one of those starters is still there, you're not getting a third starter, right? So what was your fallback option with that first hitter? What were you hoping to get there?
Well, if I didn't get, I was hoping to get Harris is what I was hoping for, but that went in the end of the second. Fine. Okay. Went Robert, but I would have gone Henderson, I think, or Adelise Garcia or Randy Rosarena. If it had been like some sick hitter draft, I still had like 3 guys behind Robert. So that's pretty much where it ended for me, though, at least in terms of that. And then I modeled you, Lewis and Horner, not purposefully, but it was very similar build in terms of getting those in the 4th and 5th. And I wanted to get a 4th hitter in the 6th round before I started even thinking about another pitcher.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. The hitter that I thought I might end up with in the 4th round was Nolan Jones. I thought that was going to be like a necessary sort of could do everything sort of pick. I mean, 30-30 pace with average, gets to play in a great park, probably hits the ball hard enough to overcome the elevated K rate that we saw. It also could just get better. Has only been in the big leagues for 134 games so far, so it doesn't mean that what we've seen so far is exactly what we're going to get as far as the swing and miss is concerned. But another example of a player that, in an auction build where everybody's available to me, I might not seek Nolan Jones out, but in a snake draft where I've got the pocket aces, he's going to be in that pocket of hitters that I have to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because we were talking about Nolan Jones on Sirius XM today, and that was exactly the thing. Is like it was out of sequence of everybody else, and it's Jones and Lewis are always the guys that are right there. And among the yellow brick road, a term you coined. I think you were the first to coin it. At least I'm going to give you credit for that one there. But the 4th round is always like the yellow brick road round
every time because it's starters and then relievers just kind of mashed together every single time. Royce Lewis, though, it's such a fun exercise. I feel like we get players like this every year where it's a partial season. It's like a 1st round combination of skills, but it's a sample that's way too small to put that sort of expectation on the player. And people get really divided on like, yes, great value, must have, no way, need to see more. And, clearly if you have them here, you at least believe enough where you feel like it's worth the gamble. But it's almost like the same conversation people have about Ellie, different skills, of course, but I'm more comfortable taking this chance in the 4th than I am in the middle of the 2nd. As exciting as Ellie is, as much as I like it, I have him in the Solds League for Tout Wars. Like I'm not an avoid Ellie sort of person, but like the 4th round just seems like a sweet spot to take a risky hitter, and you're not really going to be in that spot if you don't start pocket aces.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Or if you have an extreme strategy and you just are saying, okay, well, I'm just going to get 7 pitchers by round 15 or something like that is the trade-off there. I mean, that's the other way you could go, I suppose. And I was kind of curious if we might see more bully hitter strategies. If you might start seeing that a little bit more, given the results of this. But our friend Paul Spohr coined the term the glob when it comes to starting pitchers, and then Scott White from CBS popularized as well on their podcast. You want to avoid the glob. You want to avoid where any pitcher can get pounded in a given start. You want to have some security out there, some starters that you just know you can start every week. Even Strider had one terrible outing, but nonetheless, you want to avoid having too many of those. You want to be able to have something that you can just slot in every week.
Yeah, so I guess which extreme strategy are you more comfortable playing with, though? Are you more comfortable playing it like Dalton, where you just go pitcher, 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 or are you more comfortable saying, forget it, I'll go around all of this, I'll just load up on bats, and I'll lean into it. I'll take the chance on the undervalued pitchers, because I think with the run environment changing, our brains have this little bit of an adjustment problem where we think, oh, well, ratios weren't as good and pitching's more risky, so I have to get pitching early. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think 2 years ago, I think it was people saying, oh, there aren't enough outfielders. And it was like, well, the run environment changed the other way. And it's just your 4th and 5th outfielders just weren't putting up the same counting stats that we were used to. It didn't mean those players were worse. It just meant that the baselines all changed.
Right. And I do that targets article every year, the category targets article. The pitching one just went up this week on RotoWire. And the one that helps me kind of conceptualize it. But the problem is it's always backwards looking. It's always looking at what has happened. Last year we had the unique challenge of implementing, major rule changes. The year before that, we were coming off a lockout. The year before that, we're coming off of a COVID shortened season. Then COVID itself happened 2020. 2019 was happy fun ball. It's been like past data has been corrupted so much in the last 5 years. It makes it really tough.
Yeah, right. If it's not the ball, it's the rule changes. If it's not the rule changes, it'll be the hottest summer on record, and that's going to have its impact on the
Yes,
game,
that's
right? There's
right.
all these different things that are going to happen. Some of
Grip
them are things,
enhancement. Yeah.
right? Yeah, stuff, the sticky stuff enforcement. Like some of the things you can see coming, some of them you can't. I mean, I think the most interesting thing, there's plenty of interesting things that were always said at First Pitch Arizona, but I think Jason Collette was part of a panel where he said he was looking at the stolen base attempt rates last spring and using that to project increases in stolen bases, and
Yeah.
he pretty much nailed it. Like
Yes, he
it was
did.
a good indicator from the teams of just how much more often they were going to run. I'm glad he shared that, and I kind of think there's a chance teams are going to run more. It's something we've talked about a few times on Rates and Barrels because the success rate for the league was above 80%. So when the success rate's above 80%, everyone's going to see that and say, let's keep running. And until that success rate comes down, until you find that saturation point where you're running too much, you're going to keep putting your foot on the gas pedal. Interesting too, there was this story that I think was it Mike Petriello? No, he retweeted it, but there was a story about Freddie Freeman saying he wants Shohei to steal 100 bases this year, which would be amazing and fun. But I don't think they're going to give him that many green lights because I don't think you sign a player to a contract like that and say, pretend like you're playing in the 80s, steal 100
Right,
bases.
right.
Don't think that's really what they want. But the point is, like, I could just see teams being a lot more aggressive if we were to see over the course of spring training, stolen bases are up 20% again. How does that change your approach? Like if we have a year where it looked like
Yeah.
that was a meaningful data point to build off of, how much does that shape? I mean, it just changes your targets, if nothing else. Maybe it doesn't change the way you build, but it gives you a better sense of how much you really
Right.
need.
Well, the first thing I would do is look to see if it's distributed evenly, right? Is it certain guys that are just running more, or is everybody running? Like you look at the Reds, everybody runs pretty
Mhm.
much. I think the Angels under Ron Washington might be a team that everybody runs more. Um, Not everybody will be on board with that. I have a hard time seeing like the Rays or the Astros saying, okay, yeah, we're going to forget everything we know about stolen bases and we're just going to give everybody the green light. Jose Abreu, off you go. I just don't think that's going to happen.
No, there's still some limitations. I mean, the bags are only so much bigger, right? So you can't
Yeah.
take a 10th percentile sprint speed guy and make him steal 25 bases. That probably wouldn't work.
Right.
I know it's not all sprint speed, but at a certain
Right.
point, yeah, the math still has to work. I think there's just a lot of guys who are sort of like league average runners by speed that
Mhm.
could run a lot more. And I think there's even something in the projections that has been kind of bizarre is it just seems like the run environment within the projection set is off relative to stolen bases. I don't know if that's by design or by accident, but
Right.
the one that doesn't make any sense to me is the Trey Turner projection. He's projected for 20, 28 steals by ATC,
Okay.
like 27 by Zips, 25 Steamer, 32 and 33 for the Bat and the Bat X. He stole 30 and 30 attempts last year with a 320 OBP, and that was his lowest OBP since his rookie season. So a guy that never gets caught, who's still a burner, who has that as a huge part of his game, if we're reasonably assuming he's going to kind of bounce back to his previous OBP, like a 340, there's more opportunities to run right there.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. Like, why would he run less than he did last year unless you're clipping a bunch of playing time, which they're not. The projections are only knocking down like 20 to 30 plate appearances off of last year's total. So it's not just Turner, it's a bunch of other players, but he's just one of them that you look
I'm
at.
at 29 myself. So it's a good question. Well, I mean, the last 3 years, 32, 27, 30. That's kind of his number, isn't it? I guess if you're going 25, that's below everything. And it must be age is the factor that I would guess is that's the what machine projections are doing, right? Is they're factoring in age as a variable there that maybe doesn't go with 3-year weighted averages.
Right, and he's going to be 31 in June, so normally a player's going to start to slow down, but there's just
But he was
no
perfect
indication.
last year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no indication by result or even by just the sprint speed metrics that Trey Turner's actually really slowing down.
Yeah. I mean, he could be a guy that the Phillies could just say, hey, you're so good at this. It's okay if you get caught 5 times. Why don't you steal 45? That could happen, but it hasn't happened since like 2018 either, really. So,
Yeah, I think it could be one of those things where if he could get you 10 more bags than he did last year, and would anyone really be surprised?
Yeah, but how much does that really correlate to more runs scored anyhow?
Small. It's a small increase, but yeah, it's all just part of the big equation. And I just wonder how much front offices sat around and chewed on this and said, we're gonna let these guys run more. We're gonna have these guys run a little more. Like there has to be, every organization is gonna be different. I mean, some teams probably aren't paying attention at all because there's a few teams that don't pay attention at all.
Like the Rockies are in the corner, as I always like to say.
Yeah,
eating paste. But
unless they just have they're the kind of team that just looks at something like this and then makes a sweeping generalization like, well, everyone should be running.
Yep.
Or
yeah,
you don't see it coming until it's too late.
Chris Bryant, start running again. I'm hurt, right. Coach. Still, I don't care. Run. All right.
We're paying you to steal bases too, you know.
Yes, exactly. Who paid you for 162? Let's go. But that's not going to happen, unfortunately. I can guarantee you that part. Yeah, this is good stuff. One last question, just general pocket aces question. We'll tie this all in. Is there a position in the draft where you're more prone to doing so? Like I noticed in TGFBI, your league's done already. You were on the wheel at 15 and you did not do pocket aces. In fact, you went hitter to start.
Yeah, I think I'm a lot less likely to do it at the back wheel this year. I mean, I wouldn't do it at the front wheel with Acuna, at least being the first pick. I guess my second and third could theoretically be pitcher. I mean, that might be actually a lot of fun because you've got great hitting base, and then you load up with two starters that you really like. So if I were to draw the number one pick, that would be something I'd think about. But at 15, there was no chance that I was going to take Cole with Burns or Cole with Wheeler or any combination of the two guys that would have been there. I think there's so much potential value on the bats that are readily available back there. Maybe this comes back to what I was saying before, run environment's up, so it seems like there's more high quality hitters than there really are. The high quality hitters are all amazing, but the bar just moved. Everybody's really good. But I think a lot of it's that Bryce Harper's one of those guys, like, he's so good, and he's finally healthy again. We saw it in the second half. Yordan Alvarez, to me, is the player that could be like the next Aaron Judge as far as a big average, massive power sort of season. I think he's capable of it, and it's the question of when it's going to happen, not if. So for me, it's like I look at that spot in the back of the draft order. I want the excess in power with a great average. Nice that Harper runs a little. Not really a big deal if he doesn't. I want that because I feel like my middle round steals are going to be plentiful. Like I'm going to find enough guys who run and run a lot who won't hurt me. I can make up for that later. And I think it came together, really, really well for me. What I've noticed though is that I'm getting a ton of Trevor Story and Anthony Volpe. I'm chasing those two guys as sources of speed at shortstop and middle infield on a regular basis because of the way I'm building earlier on, pushing a little more starting pitching and power heavy in the foundation.
I like it. I actually, at 12, I went with Harper at 11. I went Turner Harper at 11, 111 and 2-2. I'm absolutely prioritizing Harper. I also like your comment on Volpe. I'm getting a lot of him as well. Story, I can't do it because of the Ks so much. Although, I mean, I'm a total hypocrite because Volpe obviously struggled with that last year too. And I know how much Story ran last year, but I haven't been able to pull the trigger on him yet.
Yeah, there's a handful of these guys that signed big free agent deals and it just hasn't worked out, mostly because of health across the board. With Story, I think as a righty playing half his games in Fenway, like that alone gives him a pretty good foundation as a hitter.
Right.
I'm a little worried about the K rate keeping the average down, but at the same time, if it could be 15 to 20 homers with 30 plus steals, I think that's a really nice value in that pick 150 to 175 range. And if I'm good on speed, the similar player that's just power over speed is Willy Adames. I think he ends up being the great fit if you have to kind of chase some power in the middle infield in that same range.
Yep. Agreed completely there. And I have found that Adames is that guy when I miss out on my early shortstops that I go with a lot there. And it costs you a 12th round pick. That's damaging if it totally flops. But it's not killing either. It's not disqualifying. So that's a way to go too. Derek, we could talk about this forever, except I know you have a kid. So you cannot talk about this forever. So thank you so much for coming on board today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Absolutely. Derek VanRiper, catch him on Rates and Barrels. Read him at The Athletic. Follow him on Twitter, where he will not fight with you in the streets, at Derek VanRiper. And thanks for listening to RotoWire. Thanks to Fantrax for their sponsorship. We'll have Clay and Todd tomorrow on the podcast. Thanks for listening.